Please help us reach 1,000 subscribers on this new channel Cheating Tales Lab. We hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Dominic Kruger's eyes scanned the San Francisco skyline from his corner office, a satisfied smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The city sprawled before him like a conquered kingdom, and in many ways it was. His tech company, Kruger Innovations, had just closed another record-breaking quarter. The stock was soaring, investors were practically salivating, and his competitors were scrambling to keep up. He turned from the window, his Italian leather shoes silent on the plush carpet. The office was a testament to his success. All sleek lines and modern art, carefully curated to project power and sophistication. Dominic himself was cut from the same cloth. At 45, he still had the lean physique of a man a decade younger, his salt-and-pepper hair artfully styled to project wisdom without age. A soft knock at the door interrupted his musings. "Come in," he called, voice crisp and authoritative. His assistant, Sarah, entered with a stack of reports. "The quarterly numbers, Mr. Kruger. And your wife called. She wanted to remind you about the gallery opening tonight." Dominic's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Elena, his trophy wife, the envy of every executive in Silicon Valley. She was probably already preening in front of a mirror, selecting which designer gown would best showcase her flawless figure. "Thank you, Sarah. That'll be all." As the door closed, Dominic allowed himself a moment of honesty. The marriage had become tedious. Elena was beautiful, certainly, but lately, her constant demands for attention, her thinly veiled dissatisfaction, it grated on him. He had an empire to run, for God's sake. He couldn't be expected to entertain her every whim. Still, appearances had to be maintained. The power couple routine was good for business, even if it had become little more than a charade. Across town, in their sprawling Pacific Heights mansion, Elena Kruger was indeed standing before a mirror. But her expression was far from the smug satisfaction Dominic had imagined. Her perfectly manicured fingers fidgeted with the clasp of a diamond necklace, another extravagant gift from her husband. It felt more like a collar with each passing day. Elena sighed, studying her reflection. At 32, she was still breathtaking. Honey blonde hair, piercing green eyes, a body that turned heads wherever she went. But lately, those admiring glances had begun to feel hollow. What good was being desired if the one person whose attention she craved barely spared her a glance? She thought back to the early days of their marriage. Dominic had been so attentive then, showering her with gifts and whisking her away on romantic getaways. But as his company grew, so did the distance between them. Now, she was lucky if he made it home for dinner twice a week. Elena's gaze drifted to the invitation on her vanity. Another tedious gallery opening. She'd go, of course, play the adoring wife, laugh at all the right jokes, charm all the right people. It's what was expected of her. But God, how she longed for something real, something that made her feel alive again. Little did she know that something was about to walk into her life and turn it upside down. The gallery was a hive of activity when Elena arrived, fashionably late as always. She glided through the crowd, accepting air kisses and compliments with practiced ease. Dominic was nowhere to be seen, but that was hardly surprising. He'd probably show up an hour late, make a token appearance, then duck out early citing some urgent business matter. She was on her second glass of champagne when she first laid eyes on him. Tall, with tousled dark hair and a roguish grin, he stood out from the sea of meticulously groomed tech moguls and their arm candy. He was studying a large abstract canvas, his head cocked to one side in genuine contemplation. Before she knew what she was doing, Elena found herself drifting towards him. "Fascinating piece, isn't it?" she said, her voice carrying just a hint of playful sarcasm. He turned, and Elena felt her breath catch. His eyes were a startling shade of blue, dancing with mischief and something darker, more dangerous. "Oh, absolutely," he replied, matching her tone. "I particularly enjoy how the artist has captured the existential dread of modern society through the liberal application of..." He squinted at the canvas. What appears to be blue paint splattered randomly across the canvas. Elena couldn't help it. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh that she hadn't experienced in far too long. "I'm Elena," she said, extending her hand. He took it, his touch lingering just a fraction too long to be proper. "Tony Harper. Pleasure to meet you, Elena." As they fell into easy conversation, Elena felt a spark ignite within her. Tony was everything Dominic wasn't: passionate, spontaneous, fully present in the moment. He was an artist, he explained, though he spoke about his work with a self-deprecating humor that was refreshingly unpretentious. They were so engrossed in their conversation that Elena didn't notice Dominic's arrival until he was standing right beside her, his presence as imposing as ever. "Darling," he said, his tone pleasant but with an undercurrent of steel. "I see you've made a new friend." Elena felt a flash of guilt, quickly suppressed. She hadn't done anything wrong after all. "Dominic, this is Tony Harper. He's an artist. Tony, my husband, Dominic Kruger." The two men sized each other up, an unspoken tension crackling between them. Dominic's handshake was just a touch too firm, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "An artist? How fascinating," Dominic said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "I'm afraid I'll have to steal my wife away, Mr. Harper. Business to discuss, you understand." As Dominic led her away, his hand possessive on the small of her back, Elena cast one last glance over her shoulder. Tony was watching her go, that roguish grin still playing on his lips. She felt a shiver of excitement run down her spine. For the first time in years, Elena Kruger felt truly alive. Dominic Kruger was not a man accustomed to being made a fool of. As he sat in his home office, staring at the photograph spread before him, he felt a cold rage building in his chest. The images were undeniable. Elena, his wife, locked in passionate embraces with that artist from the gallery opening. Tony Harper. He'd known something was off. Elena's sudden interest in art galleries and charity functions, her distracted demeanor, the way she'd started guarding her phone. But he'd never imagined she'd have the audacity to flaunt her affairs so publicly. Louis Morrow, the private investigator he'd hired, stood silently by the door. The man knew better than to offer platitudes or apologies. He'd done his job, and done it well. "You're certain these are all the originals?" Dominic asked, his voice eerily calm. Louis nodded. "Yes, sir. No copies, no negatives. Everything's on that flash drive, too." Dominic leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He'd built an empire from nothing, crushed competitors without mercy. Did Elena really think he'd roll over for this betrayal? "You're dismissed, Louis. I'll wire the rest of your fee in the morning." As the door closed behind the investigator, Dominic allowed himself a moment of raw emotion. He swept the photographs off his desk with a snarl, watching them flutter to the floor like dead leaves. Then, as quickly as the outburst came, it passed. Dominic Kruger didn't lose control. He calculated, he planned, he struck. With cold precision, he began to act. First, a call to his bank. All joint accounts frozen. Credit cards canceled. Then his lawyer. Divorce proceedings to be initiated immediately, with the prenuptial agreement enforced to its fullest extent. Finally, he made his way to the master bedroom. Elena was out at another charity event, no doubt. He methodically packed her things, designer dresses and glittering jewels tossed unceremoniously into suitcases. When everything was ready, he penned a short note. "You wanted freedom, now you have it. Don't come back." The locks were changed within the hour. Across town, Elena was lost in a haze of champagne and desire. Tony's loft was a far cry from the sterile perfection of the Kruger mansion. It was cluttered, lived in, reeking of paint and passion. They barely made it through the door before clothes started coming off. Later, as they lay tangled in Tony's rumpled sheets, Elena felt a pang of guilt. She knew she should feel worse about betraying Dominic. But in Tony's arms, She felt truly seen for the first time in years. "We should go away together," Tony murmured, trailing kisses along her collarbone. "I've got a show coming up in Paris. Come with me." Elena hesitated. It was madness. Of course. Leave Dominic? Her entire life was built around being Mrs. Kruger. And yet, "Yes," she whispered, surprising herself. "Yes, let's do it." The dream came crashing down around her ears the moment she tried to enter her home. Her key didn't work. Frowning, she rang the bell. No answer. It was only then that she noticed the suitcases piled neatly by the door, a note pinned to the handle of one. As she read Dominic's terse message, the blood drained from her face. He knew. How could he know? Panic rising in her throat, she fumbled for her phone. Declined. The credit cards, too. In the space of an evening, Elena Kruger had gone from Silicon Valley royalty to homeless and penniless. With shaking fingers, she dialed Tony's number. He'd understand. He'd help her. But Tony's ardor had cooled considerably in the face of Elena's new circumstances. A torrid affair with a wealthy man's wife was one thing. Taking on a woman with no money and a vengeful ex? That was more commitment than Tony Harper was looking for. "I'm sorry, babe," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "I've got a career to think about. Can't afford to get caught up in all this drama. You understand, right?" As the line went dead, Elena sank to her knees on the doorstep of what had once been her home. She'd gambled everything on a fantasy and lost it all in a single night. Meanwhile, Dominic was already 3 steps ahead. He'd anticipated Elena might try to retaliate, might try to harm him or the company out of spite. So he'd gone to ground, increasing his personal security and isolating himself from potential threats. What he hadn't anticipated was the opportunistic circling of Brian Mendoza, a longtime business rival who sensed blood in the water. As news of the Krugers' marital troubles began to circulate in whispered rumors, Brian saw his chance to finally take down the mighty Dominic Kruger. A hostile takeover bid was launched, backed by a smear campaign designed to shake investor confidence in Kruger Innovations. Brian's team worked overtime, digging for any dirt they could use to destabilize Dominic's position. But Brian Mendoza was about to learn a harsh lesson. Dominic Kruger was most dangerous when he was cornered. As Elena found herself cast adrift, Tony Harper was hatching a plan of his own. He might not want the woman, but he saw an opportunity to cash in on the scandal. With a few choice photos and the right leverage, he figured he could squeeze a tidy sum out of the great Dominic Kruger. It was a plan born of arrogance and greed, fueled by Tony's belief in his own charm and cunning. He had no idea he was poking a sleeping bear, one that was about to wake up and tear his world apart. Dominic Kruger sat in his office, a glass of scotch untouched on the desk before him. To an outside observer, he might have appeared defeated, a man brought low by personal betrayal and professional attack. They would have been gravely mistaken. Behind Dominic's steely gaze, plans were forming, strategies coalescing. He'd been backed into a corner, yes, but a cornered predator is the most dangerous kind. The phone on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Kruger," his assistant's voice came through. "There's a Tony Harper here to see you. He says it's urgent." A cold smile played at the corners of Dominic's mouth. "Right on schedule. Send him in." Tony swaggered into the office, all false bravado and ill-fitting confidence. He tossed an envelope onto Dominic's desk. "I think you'll find the contents of that very interesting," Tony said, trying and failing to keep his voice steady under Dominic's unwavering stare. Dominic didn't even glance at the envelope. "Let me guess. Photos of you and my wife in various compromising positions. And in exchange for not releasing these to the press, you want what? Money? A stake in my company?" Tony's smirk faltered. This wasn't going according to plan. "Look, Kruger, I'm giving you a chance to keep this quiet. You wouldn't want—" "Mr. Harper," Dominic interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. "Did you really think you were the first to try this? That I wouldn't be prepared?" With a click of his mouse, Dominic turned his computer screen towards Tony. On it was a comprehensive dossier. Tony's history of fraud, his past cons, every skeleton in his closet laid bare. You see, while you were busy taking photos, I was busy learning everything there is to know about Tony Harper. Or should I say, Anthony Harding? Michael Torres? You've had quite a few names, haven't you? The color drained from Tony's face. How did you dash? I have resources you couldn't begin to imagine, Mr. Harper. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over every copy of those photos, every scrap of evidence of your affair with my wife. And then you're going to disappear. Because if you don't, I will bury you so deep in legal troubles that you'll be lucky to see daylight again this decade. Am I clear? Tony nodded. All pretense of confidence evaporated. He scrambled to leave, but Dominic's voice stopped him at the door. Oh, and Tony, if you ever come near me or my company again, what I've done to you today will seem like a gentle warning. Now get out of my sight. As the door closed behind Tony's retreating form, Dominic allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. One threat neutralized, but there were bigger battles yet to fight. Across town, Brian Mendoza was feeling pretty pleased with himself. His takeover bid of Kruger Innovations was gaining traction. Investors were getting nervous. The board was asking questions. It was only a matter of time before Dominic Kruger's empire came crumbling down. But Brian had made a critical error. He'd assumed that Dominic, reeling from personal scandal, would be too distracted to mount an effective defense. He couldn't have been more wrong. Even as Brian celebrated his perceived victory, Dominic was mobilizing. Loyal employees were rallied, allies in the industry called upon. A counteroffensive was launched with surgical precision. Damaging information about Brian's business practices began to leak to the press. Key investors in Brian's takeover bid suddenly got cold feet. And through it all, Dominic Kruger stood firm, projecting an image of unshakable confidence to the world. The tide began to turn. What had seemed like an assured victory for Brian Mendoza was rapidly becoming a rout. And then, just when Dominic thought he had weathered the worst of the storm, Elena reappeared. She stood on his doorstep, a far cry from the glamorous socialite she'd been just months before. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her makeup smudged. In her arms, she cradled an infant. "Dominic," she said, her voice cracking, "please, I have nowhere else to go. This is your son." For a moment, just a moment, Dominic felt a flicker of something: pity, regret, but he squashed it ruthlessly. Elena had made her choice. She betrayed him, tried to make a fool of him. "Come in," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "We have much to discuss." As Elena stepped past him, clutching the child to her chest, Dominic's mind was already racing. A child complicated things, but it also presented opportunities, ways to ensure Elena could never threaten him again. He closed the door behind them, his expression unreadable. The game had changed, but Dominic Kruger was nothing if not adaptable. Whatever Elena's plan was, whatever she hoped to gain by this, he would turn it to his advantage. After all, in business and in life, Dominic Kruger always came out on top, and he had no intention of breaking that streak now. Dominic Kruger's office was a fortress of glass and steel, much like the man himself. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, surveying the city that had nearly slipped from his grasp. But Dominic Kruger didn't lose. Not to faithless wives, not to opportunistic artists, and certainly not to corporate vultures like Brian Mendoza. The intercom buzzed. "Sir, she's here." A cold smile played at the corners of Dominic's mouth. "Send her in." Elena entered, a shadow of her former self. Gone were the designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair. She looked small, defeated. "Good. Sit," Dominic commanded, not bothering to turn around. Elena perched on the edge of a chair, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Dominic, Save it," he cut her off, finally facing her. His eyes were chips of ice. "I'm not interested in your excuses or your tears. I'm interested in what you can do for me." Confusion flickered across Elena's face. What I can do for you? Dominic leaned against his desk, looming over her. Brian Mendoza. I know you've met him at those insufferable charity galas you used to drag me to. I want you to get close to him. Feed him information. Information I'll provide. Elena's eyes widened. You want me to spy for you? Think of it as penance, Dominic replied, his voice dripping with disdain. You were so eager to betray me before. Now you can put those skills to good use. Elena swallowed hard. This wasn't the reunion she'd hoped for, but what choice did she have? She was broke, homeless, with a child to care for. Dominic held all the cards. And if I do this, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, you'll let us stay? Dominic's smile was shark-like. I'll consider it, but understand this, Elena. One misstep, one hint of betrayal, and you'll wish I'd left you on the streets. Are we clear? Elena nodded, feeling the last of her dignity crumble away. Crystal. As Elena left the office, Dominic allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He'd transformed his greatest liability into a weapon against his enemies. And when this was all over, when Brian Mendoza was crushed beneath his heel, he'd discard Elena just as easily. Across town, Brian Mendoza was feeling the pressure. His initial assault on Kruger Innovations had stalled, and now he was hemorrhaging investors. He paced his office, tie loosened, hair disheveled. How the hell is he doing this? Brian snarled at his team of advisors. He should be on the ropes. One brave soul spoke up. Sir, we've underestimated him. Kruger's more resilient than we thought. Brian slammed his fist on the desk. I don't want excuses. I want results. Find me something, anything we can use against him. As if on cue, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. Brian answered, hope and desperation warring in his voice. Hello, Mr. Mendoza? A woman's voice, hesitant but familiar. It's Elena Kruger. I think I have some information you might find interesting. Brian's eyes lit up with predatory glee. Sometimes, the universe delivered exactly what you needed. He was walking right into Dominic Kruger's trap. Dominic sat in his home office, watching the chess pieces move across the board. Elena had made contact with Brian, just as he'd instructed. Now it was time to feed the snake some poison. He picked up his phone, dialing a familiar number. Lewis? I need you to keep an eye on Elena. Every move, every conversation. I want to know if she so much as sneezes without my permission. Louis Morrow, ever the professional, didn't ask questions. Understood, Mr. Kruger. I'll get on it right away. As Dominic hung up, he allowed himself a small smile. Elena thought she was playing the game, but she was just another pawn on his board. And pawns were meant to be sacrificed. Days turned into weeks. Elena fed Brian carefully crafted morsels of insider information, each one designed to lead him further down the path of his own destruction. Brian, blinded by his desperation to take down Dominic, swallowed every lie. But even the best-laid plans have variables. And this variable came in the form of Allison Carter, a ghost from Elena's past. Allison had always envied Elena's life. Her beauty, her wealth, her seemingly perfect marriage. Now, working as Brian Mendoza's personal assistant, she saw an opportunity for revenge. It was a chance encounter at a coffee shop. Elena, exhausted from her double life, nearly walked right past her old friend. Elena, Allison's voice was honey-sweet, laced with hidden venom. My God, it's been years. Elena froze, plastering on a fake smile. Allison, what a surprise. As they caught up, Allison's sharp eyes took in Elena's worn appearance, the absence of her wedding ring. She smelled blood in the water. You poor thing, Allison cooed, false sympathy dripping from every word. Dominic treating you badly? You know, I'm working for Brian Mendoza now. I'm sure he'd be very interested in hearing about your situation. Elena's heart raced. This wasn't part of the plan. But as Allison spoke, painting pictures of freedom, a revenge against Dominic. A treacherous part of Elena's mind began to listen. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this mess after all. Elena Kruger stood in the opulent bathroom of Brian Mendoza's penthouse office, her hands shaking as she gripped the sink. What had she done? The weight of her latest betrayal sat heavy in her stomach, threatening to claw its way up her throat. She just handed Brian Mendoza the keys to Dominic's Kingdom Real actionable intelligence about Kruger Innovations' next big move. Not the carefully crafted lies Dominic had fed her, but genuine information she'd stumbled upon during one of her reconnaissance missions at the company. Allison's words echoed in her head. Think about it, Elena. Once Brian takes down Dominic, you'll be free. Rich, powerful, answering to no one. Isn't that what you've always wanted? It had been so tempting. A way out of the corner Dominic had backed her into, a chance to reclaim some semblance of control over her life. But as she stared at her reflection, Elena didn't see a woman on the verge of victory. She saw a fool who had made the same mistake twice. Meanwhile, in his war room at Kruger Innovations, Dominic Kruger allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Sir, his assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. Mr. Mendoza's company just made the move, exactly as you predicted. Dominic's eyes glittered with triumph. Excellent. Initiate phase 2. He'd known Elena would betray him again. It was in her nature, after all. So he laid a trap within a trap. The secret information Elena had stumbled upon? A carefully orchestrated ruse, designed to lead Brian Mendoza into financial ruin. As news of Brian's disastrous business decision hit the financial wires, Dominic savored the moment. He'd crush one enemy with the weapon of another. Poetry in motion. But Dominic Kruger wasn't one to leave loose ends. It was time to deal with Elena and her little co-conspirator once and for all. Across town, Allison Carter was riding high. She'd done it. She'd finally won up the great Elena Kruger. Brian Mendoza was ecstatic, already planning the dismantling of Kruger Innovations. And he'd promised Allison a sizable reward for her part in it all. The knock at her apartment door was unexpected. She opened it, a quizzical expression on her face, only to find Dominic Kruger standing there, flanked by two very large, very serious-looking men. "Hello, Allison," Dominic said, his voice pleasant but his eyes glacial. "I think it's time we had a chat, don't you?" Allison's blood ran cold. How had he found out? What did he know? As Dominic stepped into her apartment, Allison realized with sickening clarity that she'd underestimated the man. Badly. The confrontation that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Dominic laid out every sordid detail of Allison's past. Her petty crimes, her manipulations, her burning envy of Elena. He had dates, times, witness statements. An ironclad case that could send her to prison for years. "Please," Allison whimpered. All pretense of strength evaporated. "I'll do anything. Just don't turn me in." Dominic's smile was that of a predator cornering its prey. "Oh, I know you will, Allison. In fact, you're going to help me tie up the last loose end in this little drama." An hour later, Elena received a text from Allison. "Emergency. Meet me at the usual place. Now." Elena arrived at the quiet cafe, her nerves frayed. Had something gone wrong with the plan? Was Brian suspicious? Her blood froze in her veins when she saw not just Allison, but Dominic sitting at the corner table. Allison's face was ashen, her eyes red-rimmed. Dominic looked like the cat that ate the canary. "Sit down, Elena," Dominic said, his voice deceptively soft. "It's time we cleared the air, don't you think?" What followed was the most excruciating hour of Elena's life. Dominic systematically dismantled every lie, every scheme, every betrayal. He knew everything, had known everything from the start. "You see, Elena," Dominic explained, almost gentle in his cruelty, "you never stood a chance. You're playing checkers in a world of chess grandmasters." Elena broke. The weight of her actions, the futility of her struggles, it all came crashing down. She sobbed, mascara streaking down her cheeks, all dignity abandoned. "What do you want from me?" she choked out between sobs. Dominic leaned back, regarding her with cold calculation. "It's quite simple, really. You're going to help me destroy Brian Mendoza, completely and utterly. And then, my dear soon-to-be ex-wife, you're going to disappear. I'll provide for the child. After all, it's not the boy's fault his mother is a treacherous snake. But you'll live with the consequences of your choices." Elena nodded, defeated. She had no fight left in her. No more schemes. No more dreams of outsmarting Dominic Kruger. As they left the cafe, Elena felt the last vestiges of her old life slip away. She'd wanted freedom, excitement, passion. Instead, she'd found herself trapped in a web of her own making, with Dominic Kruger as the spider at its center. And the truly terrifying part, a small, traitorous part of her admired him for it. Dominic Kruger stood at the head of the conference table, his presence commanding absolute attention. The room was filled with his most trusted lieutenants, each handpicked for their loyalty and ruthless efficiency. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dominic began, his voice steady and cold, "today we end this. Brian Mendoza thought he could take what's mine. He thought he could use my personal life against me. Today, we show him the error of his ways." He nodded to his CFO, who pulled up a series of complex financial projections on the screen behind him. "Thanks to the information provided by our friends. Here," Dominic's lips curled in a cruel smirk. "Mr. Mendoza has overextended himself. His company is leveraged to the hilt, banking on a takeover that will never materialize." The room buzzed with anticipation. They'd all seen Dominic Kruger in action before, but this was something else entirely. "We strike at dawn," Dominic continued. "I want every financial weapon in our arsenal deployed. Call in every favor, leverage every contact. By this time tomorrow, Brian Mendoza won't have 2 pennies to rub together." As his team dispersed, each eager to play their part in the destruction of Brian Mendoza, Dominic allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. He'd taken every blow life had thrown at him, a faithless wife, a grasping rival, and turned them into the instruments of his ultimate victory. Across town, Brian Mendoza was living in blissful ignorance of the sword dangling over his head. He paced his office, practically giddy with anticipated triumph. "This is it, people," he crowed to his assembled executives. "By this time next week, Kruger Innovations will be ours. That smug bastard won't know what hit him. If only Brian knew that the insider information he'd based his entire strategy on was nothing but smoke and mirrors, a carefully crafted illusion designed to lead him to this very moment." As Brian raised a glass in premature celebration, a desperate plan was forming in the mind of Tony Harper. Recently released from prison, his reputation in tatters thanks to Dominic's machinations, Tony saw Brian's crusade against Kruger as his ticket back to the top. He smooth-talked his way into a meeting with Brian, spinning a tale of inside knowledge and burning desire for revenge against Dominic. "I know that bastard better than anyone," Tony insisted, his charm cranked up to 11. "I can get you information that'll bury him for good." Brian, drunk on the prospect of victory and more than a little actual champagne, took the bait. "All right, Harper, you've got one shot. Don't make me regret this." Brian just invited a viper into his nest. Tony had no intention of helping Brian succeed. No! Tony Harper was out for himself, as always. And if he had to play both sides to come out on top, well, that's just good business, isn't it? Dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. But in the offices of Kruger Innovations and Mendoza Enterprises, no one had time to appreciate the view. The financial war that had been brewing for months erupted in full force. Dominic's team moved with surgical precision, exploiting every weakness in Brian's overextended empire. Stock prices plummeted, credit lines were frozen, and whispers of impending bankruptcy began to circulate among investors. Brian Mendoza watched in horror as his carefully constructed house of cards came tumbling down around him. "This is impossible," he raged. slamming his fist on his desk. How could all our intel be wrong? In his panic, Brian turned to his ace in the hole, Tony Harper. You said you could bring Kruger down. What the hell happened? Tony, ever the opportunist, saw the writing on the wall. It was time to switch sides. Again. I can explain everything, Tony said, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. But not here. Meet me at the abandoned warehouse on Pier 17 tonight. I'll give you all the evidence you need to turn this around. As Brian grasped at this last desperate straw, Dominic Kruger was putting the final pieces of his plan into place. He'd anticipated Tony's inevitable betrayal, had counted on the man's predictable greed and self-interest. Is everything in place? Dominic asked Lewis, his ever-loyal private investigator. Lewis nodded, a smile on his face. Yes, sir. The police have been anonymously tipped off about a major drug deal going down at Pier 17 tonight. They'll be there in force. Dominic allowed himself a cold chuckle. Excellent. Make sure our friend Mr. Harper is found with a very incriminating briefcase, won't you? As night fell, Brian Mendoza crept into the dimly lit warehouse, desperation etched on his face. He found Tony waiting, a sleek briefcase in his hand. Brian, my friend, Tony said, his voice oily with false camaraderie. I have here everything you need to take down Dominic Kruger once and for all. But before Brian could reach for the case, the warehouse erupted in chaos. Police sirens wailed. Flashlights pierced the darkness, and stern voices ordered everyone to freeze. In the ensuing melee, Tony tried to make a break for it, only to run smack into a wall of police officers. The briefcase fell open, spilling packets of white powder and stacks of cash across the floor. As Brian and Tony were led away in handcuffs, Dominic Kruger watched from the shadows, a satisfied smirk on his face. In one masterstroke, he removed both threats to his empire and his peace of mind. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving Dominic alone with his thoughts and his victory. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. It's done, he said simply, then hung up without waiting for a response. Across town, Elena's phone buzzed with a cryptic message. She knew what it meant. The endgame had played out, and Dominic had won. As always, she looked down at the sleeping child in her arms, Tony's child, the unwitting pawn in this whole sordid affair, and felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. What would become of them now? Dominic had promised to provide for the child, but Elena harbored no illusions about her own fate. She'd betrayed him twice, and Dominic Kruger was not a man who gave third chances. The next morning, the financial world was in an uproar. Brian Mendoza, once the golden boy of Silicon Valley, was plastered across every news channel. Footage of his arrest, along with salacious details of alleged drug trafficking and corporate espionage, played on a loop. Dominic sat in his office, watching the chaos unfold with detached amusement. His phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters, investors, board members, all clamoring for a statement, for reassurance, for a piece of the man who had once again snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. But Dominic's mind was already moving on to the next phase of his plan. He'd neutralized his enemies, yes, but there were still loose ends to tie up. Elena, for one, and the child, an innocent caught in the crossfire of adult machinations. He pressed the intercom. "Send her in," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Elena entered, looking small and defeated. The fire that had once drawn Dominic to her was gone, extinguished by her own poor choices and his relentless retribution. "Sit," he commanded, not unkindly. As Elena sank into the chair across from him, Dominic studied her for a long moment. "I'm sure you've seen the news," he began. Elena nodded mutely. "Brian Mendoza is finished. Tony Harper is back in prison where he belongs. And you." He paused, letting the weight of her situation sink in. "You have a choice to make." Elena looked up, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "A choice?" Dominic leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Yes, I promise to provide for the child, and I'm a man of my word. But you You've proven time and again that you can't be trusted. So here are your options. You can walk away now. I'll set up a trust for the boy, ensure he wants for nothing, but you'll never see him again. Elena gasped, clutching at her chest as if physically struck. Or, she whispered, dreading the answer. Or, Dominic continued, his voice cold and precise, you can stay, work for me, under my direct supervision. Every move watched, every action scrutinized. You'll have access to the child, but make no mistake. One misstep, one hint of betrayal, and you'll lose everything. For good this time. Tears welled in Elena's eyes as a full import of Dominic's words sank in. This was no magnanimous gesture of forgiveness. This was a life sentence, a cage gilded with the promise of proximity to her child. Why? She choked out. Why offer me anything at all? Dominic's expression softened, just for a moment. Because despite everything, Elena, there was a time when I loved you. And that boy, he deserves a chance at a better life than either of us had. I might change my decision according to your behavior. Elena nodded, wiping away her tears. She knew there was only one choice she could make. I'll stay, she said quietly, under your terms. Dominic stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Very well. I'll contact you soon. As Elena left the office, Dominic turned to look out over the city he now undisputedly ruled. He'd won, completely and utterly. His enemies were vanquished, his position secure. Dominic Kruger straightened his tie and prepared to face the press. There was still work to be done, an empire to run, and Dominic Kruger was nothing if not a man who always looked forward, never back. The sun set on San Francisco, casting long shadows across the city. In his penthouse office, Dominic raised a glass of scotch in a silent toast. To victory, to power, to the unyielding strength that had carried him through every battle. Dominic Kruger stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, a glass of scotch in hand, surveying the city that now lay at his feet. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a fitting backdrop to the end of his long campaign. Brian Mendoza's company, once a formidable rival, was now just another asset in Dominic's ever-expanding portfolio, acquired for a fraction of its worth in the chaos of Brian's spectacular downfall. The media was having a field day with the story: corporate espionage, blackmail, even drug trafficking. Brian's reputation was in tatters, his future bleak. Dominic allowed himself a small, cold smile. He'd won, utterly and completely. A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. "Come in," he called, not turning from the window. Louis Morrow, his loyal private investigator, entered quietly. "It's done, Mr. Kruger. Tony Harper has been arrested on embezzlement charges. The evidence we planted was quite convincing." Dominic nodded, satisfaction evident in the set of his shoulders. "And Allison? Blacklisted, as you ordered. She won't find work in the city again, or any other for that matter." "Good," Dominic said, finally turning to face Louis. "You've done well as always. There's a bonus in it for you." Louis nodded his thanks and left, knowing better than to linger in Dominic's presence unnecessarily. Alone again, Dominic's thoughts turned to Elena, his ex-wife, the woman who had betrayed him, who had tried to manipulate him with a child that wasn't even his. She was a last loose end to tie up. Across town, in a small, sparsely furnished apartment, Elena Kruger, no, Elena Davis now, stared at her reflection in a grimy mirror. Gone were the designer clothes, the perfectly coiffed hair, the flawless makeup. In their place was a woman she barely recognized, worn down by guilt, desperation, and the relentless grind of a life she'd never been prepared for. The sound of a child's laughter drifted in from the next room, a bittersweet reminder of the one good thing to come out of this whole mess. Her son, innocent and unaware of the turmoil that had brought them to this point. Elena's phone buzzed with a text, an address, a time, and 2 words that sent a chill down her spine. "Be there." She knew who it was from. Dominic never signed his messages, never needed to. His presence was felt in every curt word, every command. The next day, Elena found herself in a nondescript office building, facing the man she had once called husband. Dominic looked exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed, not a hair out of place, his eyes as cold and calculating as ever. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. It wasn't a request. Elena perched on the edge of the seat, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Dominic, He held up a hand, silencing her. "I'm not interested in apologies or explanations, Elena. What's done is done. I've arranged a job for you, far from here. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. You'll be able to support yourself and the child." Elena blinked, surprised by this unexpected show of not kindness, exactly, but something less than the vindictiveness she'd expected. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Dominic's expression remained impassive. "Don't thank me. This isn't forgiveness. This is me ensuring that you and that child stay far away from my life and my business. You will receive an allowance for the boy's care, but make no mistake. One step out of line, one attempt to contact me or anyone associated with me, and it all disappears. Are we clear?" Elena nodded, a lump forming in her throat. This was it, then, the final severing of ties with her old life. As she stood to leave, Dominic spoke again, his voice softer but no less steely. "I hope you find some peace, Elena. And I hope that child has a better life than the one you nearly condemned him to." Elena fled the office, tears streaming down her face. She'd lost everything, her wealth, her status, her self-respect. But as she thought of her son waiting at home, she realized she still had one thing left, a chance at redemption. Dominic watched her go, his face a mask of indifference. He'd done what needed to be done. The threats were neutralized, his empire secure. If there was a hollow feeling in the pit of his stomach, well, that was just the price of victory, wasn't it? 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. Dominic Kruger's empire had grown, his influence expanding far beyond the tech world he'd once dominated. He'd become a force of nature in the business world, respected and feared in equal measure. But tonight, as he sat in his study, none of that mattered. His eyes were fixed on a photo he hadn't looked at in years, himself as a young boy, standing beside his father. The man's face was kind, his smile genuine. It was taken just weeks before everything fell apart, before his father's business partners betrayed him, leaving their family destitute. A knock at the door jolted Dominic from his memories. "Come in," he called, quickly replacing the photo in his desk drawer. His assistant entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Mr. Kruger, there's someone here to see you. It's Elena Davis. She says it's urgent." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Elena? After all this time?" "Send her in," he said, his voice betraying none of the surprise he felt. Moments later, Elena walked through the door. She looked different, older, certainly, but there was something else, a quiet dignity that hadn't been there before. And trailing behind her, clutching her hand, was a boy of about 6 years old. "Dominic," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "I'm sorry to come unannounced. I need your help." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his face impassive. "You're a long way from where I left you, Elena. This had better be good." Elena took a deep breath. "I'm dying, Dominic. Cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less." She gestured to the boy, who was looking around the office with wide-eyed curiosity. "This is James, my son. Your son." Dominic's eyes flicked to the boy, then back to Elena. "We've been through this before, Elena. I'm not the father." "No, you're not," Elena admitted. "Not biologically. But you're the only one who can give him a chance at a good life after I'm gone. Please, Dominic. I know I have no right to ask, but dash." "You're right." Dominic cut her off, his voice cold. "You have no right. Why should I take in the child of the man who tried to destroy me?" Elena flinched at his words, but stood her ground. Because you're a better man than Tony ever was. Because this child is innocent of our sins. Because I think you need this as much as James does. Dominic's eyebrows rose at her boldness. He studied the boy more closely. James met his gaze unflinchingly, a spark of defiance in his eyes that reminded Dominic uncomfortably of himself at that age. After what seemed like an eternity, Dominic spoke. I'll consider it, but I make no promises. You'll stay here in the city where I can keep an eye on you. I'll have my doctors look at your case. Relief washed over Elena's face. Thank you, Dominic. That's more than I dared hope for. As Elena and James left the office, Dominic turned back to the window, his mind churning. What was he thinking, even considering this? And yet, he pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. Lewis? I need you to do a complete background check on Elena Davis and her son James. Leave no stone unturned. As he hung up, Dominic's eyes fell on the drawer where he'd hidden the photo of his father. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. The next few months were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, legal consultations, and careful observations. Elena's condition deteriorated rapidly, but she faced her fate with a grace that surprised Dominic. James, for his part, seemed to take everything in stride, his resilience a testament to Elena's parenting. It was a crisp autumn morning when Dominic received the call. Elena had passed in her sleep. As he put down the phone, he realized the decision had already been made, perhaps long before this moment. He found James in the hospital waiting room, small and lost in a world suddenly too big for him. Dominic knelt down, meeting the boy's eyes. James, he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. I'm not your father, but I promise you this. I will do everything in my power to give you the life your mother wanted for you. James nodded solemnly, his small hand reaching out to grasp Dominic's. In that moment, something shifted in Dominic Kruger's world. The ice around his heart began to thaw, just a little. As they left the hospital together, Dominic realized that for the first time in a very long time, he was walking toward something, not away from it. Years passed, and the unlikely pair of Dominic Kruger and James Davis forged a bond that surprised them both. James grew into a thoughtful, intelligent young man, softening Dominic's hard edges without even realizing it. Dominic's empire continued to grow, but his priorities had shifted. He found himself spending more time mentoring James, teaching him not just about business, but about life, about the importance of integrity, of standing firm in the face of adversity. It was on a sunny afternoon in the park, watching James play basketball with some friends, that Dominic received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Kruger? A hesitant voice called out. Dominic turned to find himself face to face with Brian Mendoza. The years had not been kind to his former rival. Brian's hair was streaked with gray, his once proud posture now stooped and uncertain. Mendoza, Dominic acknowledged coolly. You're a long way from where I left you. Brian winced at the reminder of his downfall. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mr. Kruger, about the choices I made, the people I hurt. He took a deep breath. I came to apologize. What I did to you, to your company, it was wrong. I let greed and envy cloud my judgment. Dominic studied the man before him, searching for any sign of deception. He found none, just a broken man seeking redemption. After a long moment, Dominic spoke. Apology accepted, Brian. We all make choices we regret. The true measure of a man is how he handles the consequences. Relief washed over Brian's face. Thank you. I don't suppose there's any chance of a job. Dominic finished for him. No, but I might know someone who could use a man with your experience. Someone willing to give second chances to those who've earned them. As Brian walked away, a weight lifted from his shoulders. Dominic turned his attention back to James. The boy, no young man now, caught his eye and waved, a broad smile on his face. Dominic found himself smiling back, a genuine expression that would have shocked those who knew him in his cutthroat days. Later that week, Dominic stood before a gathered crowd, James by his side, as he announced the launch of the Kruger Foundation. Its mission: to help children from broken homes and those affected by corporate malfeasance. In memory of my father, Dominic said, his voice strong and clear, and in honor of all those who've shown me that there's more to life than winning at all costs. As the applause died down and the crowd dispersed, Dominic felt a tug on his sleeve. It was his assistant, holding out an envelope. "This just arrived for you, sir. It's from the state penitentiary." Dominic opened the letter, his eyebrows rising as he read. It was from Tony Harper, of all people, the man who had nearly destroyed everything Dominic held dear. The letter was surprisingly introspective. Tony wrote of his regrets, of the lessons he'd learned during his time behind bars. He spoke of his admiration for Dominic's strength and resilience, and asked for forgiveness, not expecting it, but hoping for it nonetheless. Dominic folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. He'd need time to process this, to decide how to respond. As he and James walked back to the car, Dominic found himself speaking. "You know, James, forgiveness is a complicated thing. It's not about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about choosing to move forward, to not let the past dictate your future." James nodded thoughtfully. "Is that what you're going to do? Forgive Tony?" Dominic was silent for a long moment. I think I already have. Not for his sake, but for my own. Carrying that anger, that bitterness, it's exhausting. And there are more important things to focus on now." That night, Dominic sat in his study, a blank sheet of paper before him. He began to write, his pen flowing across the page. "Tony," he wrote, "I received your letter. While I can't forget the past, I choose to move forward. Use your time to reflect, to become better. When you're released, there may be a place for you at the foundation, not for the man you were, but for the man you could become." As he signed his name, Dominic felt a sense of peace wash over him. He glanced at the photo of his father, now proudly displayed on his desk. "I did it, Dad," he whispered. "I built something lasting, something good." And for the first time in decades, Dominic Kruger looked to the future not with calculation or wariness, but with hope. He had the strength to face whatever came next, the wisdom to navigate the challenges ahead, and most importantly, a legacy worth preserving. The man who had once been driven solely by revenge and control now understood the true meaning of victory. It wasn't about crushing your enemies or amassing wealth. It was about building something meaningful, about leaving the world a little better than you found it. As he turned out the lights and left his study, Dominic felt a lightness in his step. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and he was ready to face it head-on, with integrity, compassion, and the hard-won wisdom of a life fully lived.